A wrong number usually ends with sorry, wrong person. For Ylfa Silverin, it ended with the Alpha King burning her pack lands to the ground. Trapped in a dungeon cell carved from frozen stone, barefoot and bleeding, hiding from a beta who had controlled her for 3 years and sworn she would never leave him alive. She tried to text her banished brother for help. Her hands were shaking too hard. She mistyped 1 digit. That message did not go to her brother. It went to the personal phone of Boris Beaucrane, the Alpha King of the Obsidian Throne, the most feared werewolf in the realm, known across territories as the Bloodless Crown. A number that had not received a single text in 3 years. The number that once belonged to his dead mate. What happens when a desperate healer accidentally summons a king who has nothing left to lose? The answer is savage, heartbreaking, and unstoppable. This is the story of He Broke My Ribs. The sound of a werewolf rib breaking is distinct. It is not a clean crack like a branch snapping in winter. It is a wet, grinding crunch that echoes through bone and sinew, a sound that reverberates through the entire chest cavity. Ylfa Silverin heard that sound before she felt the pain. Then the air left her lungs in a violent rush, replaced by white-hot agony radiating from her left side. She collapsed onto the damp stone floor, gasping, her vision tunneling into black spots edged with torchlight. At 24 years old, Ylfa had already buried her parents, watched her younger sister die from a rogue's bite, and spent 3 years trapped in the hands of the man who had orchestrated it all. If this story grips you, please hit that like button and share it with your friends. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because trust me, the war has only just begun. Lobo Umbre stood there looking down at her as if he were staring at a stain on the dungeon floor. He did not shout. He did not scream. That was the most terrifying thing about Lobo. He was the beta of the Shadowtooth Pack, a man who knew exactly how to inflict pain without leaving marks that would raise questions during pack gatherings. Usually. But tonight, he had lost control. Ylfa tried to breathe, but every breath felt like a blade driving straight through her chest. She looked up at him through tears and saw him calmly adjusting the leather straps of his battle armor, smoothing imaginary dust from the chainmail layered across his shoulders. There was not a trace of remorse on his face, only cold disappointment, as if Ylfa were a misbehaving pup who had wasted his time and patience. "Look what you made me do," Lobo said, his voice low and even, as if he were discussing the weather. "How many times have I told you, Ylfa? Do not look male patients in the eye. Do not smile at them. Do not let them think you could belong to anyone other than me." Ylfa wanted to scream that she was only doing her job. She was a healer. She had to speak to patients. But she could not speak. The pain swallowed every word in her throat. All she could do was lie there trembling on the stone, trying not to die. Lobo stepped over her the way one would step over a piece of furniture. He picked up his belt from the iron table, buckled it with deliberate slowness, then looked back at her one last time. "I have to go to the Alpha's hall," he said in the tone of an ordinary mate saying goodbye before patrol. "There's a border dispute to handle. Clean yourself up, and when I get back, you will be in our quarters." He paused at the dungeon door and turned his head. The torchlight from the corridor cut across half his face, casting sharp shadows that made him look like a demon straight out of the moon goddess's nightmares. "If you are not in our quarters when I get back, Ylfa, we will have to continue this conversation." He tilted his head and smiled. That smile was colder than a winter in the Northern Territories. "And next time, I will not stop at your ribs. Maybe I will start with your fingers. A healer without fingers is not worth much, right?" Lobo walked out. Ylfa heard the iron door slam shut. Then the heavy slide of the bolt. Then the second lock and external chain rattling into place. 2 layers of security he had demanded after the last time she tried to run. Back then, he said it was to protect her from rogues. Now she knew it was to cage her. Lobo's boots echoed down the stone corridor. A distant door slammed. Then silence. The silence weighed heavier than the pain in her chest. Ylfa lay there, counting seconds by the frantic pounding of her heart. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 3 minutes. She had to be sure he was truly gone. Lobo had returned before when she thought he had left. He had stood in the shadows of the corridor, watching her crawl toward the door, then stepped forward with a savage grin before dragging her back by the hair and throwing her against the wall. She could not make that mistake again. When 3 full minutes had passed, Ilfa tried to move. Pain flared like wildfire inside her chest. She was a healer. She knew exactly what was happening to her body. 2 broken ribs, maybe 3. Risk of a punctured lung. Possible internal bleeding. She needed a hospital, or at least a skilled healer who wasn't herself. But she could not go to the pack healer. Lobo had his loyalists everywhere. Every wolf in the Shadowtooth pack knew better than to cross the beta. They would call him. They always called him. The last time she tried to seek help from the pack's elder healer with a dislocated shoulder, Lobo showed up within 10 minutes. He smiled at the elder, gripped Ilfa's hand tightly, and said his mate was just clumsy like that, always tripping during her rounds. That night, he broke 2 more of her fingers to teach her a lesson about seeking outside help. Ilfa needed Conry. Her brother was the only one who had never believed Lobo's perfect act. Conry had seen the bruises she tried to hide. Conry had asked questions she was too afraid to answer. And Lobo had exiled Conry from the pack, banished him as a threat to pack hierarchy, deleted his contact, blocked every path that connected them. But Ilfa still remembered Conry's number. She repeated it in her mind every night like a silent prayer. And now, lying on the frozen dungeon floor with broken ribs and breaths growing shallower, she knew this was her only chance. Either she reached Conry tonight, or she would die in this cell before Lobo came back. Ilfa's trembling fingers closed around the cracked smartphone hidden beneath the loose stone in the corner of the cell. It was a burner phone smuggled in by a sympathetic Omega who worked in the kitchens. The screen was shattered, the battery at 8%, but it still worked. She dragged herself across the floor, every movement sending fresh waves of agony through her ribs. She propped herself against the damp stone wall, the cold seeping into her torn gray dress, and unlocked the phone with shaking hands. Her vision blurred. She blinked away tears and focused on the screen. Conry's number. She had to get it right. Her fingers hovered over the keypad. She could barely see through the pain, through the tears, through the blood pooling in her mouth from where she had bitten her tongue. She typed the number. Or at least, she thought she did. Her hands were shaking so badly that she didn't notice the single mistyped digit, a 7 instead of a 4 in the area code. She typed the message. He broke my ribs. I can't breathe. Shadowtooth Dungeon. East Wing. Please. I don't have much time. She hit send. The message disappeared into the void. Ilfa let the phone slip from her fingers and slumped against the wall, chest heaving, vision darkening. She did not know that the message had not gone to her brother. She did not know that it had gone to a number that had been silent for 3 years. She did not know that, 200 miles away in the Obsidian Throne's fortress, an Alpha King was staring at a phone he thought would never light up again, and that the beast inside him had just woken up. Boris Vokraine sat alone in the war room of his fortress, surrounded by maps, tactical reports, and the weight of 3 years of grief. It was the anniversary of her death. Catwolf Primara. His mate. His queen. The woman who had been murdered on what should have been the night of their mating ceremony. He did not sleep on this night. He never did. Instead, he sat in the dark, staring at the locked safe in the corner of the room, the safe that held her belongings. Her jewelry. Her journals. And her phone. He had not opened that safe in 3 years. But tonight, something changed. A sound. A vibration. Boris's head snapped up. His wolf surged to the surface, ears ringing, instincts screaming. The phone. Catwolf's phone. It was vibrating. His hands moved on their own. He crossed the room in 3 strides, unlocked the safe with a code only he knew, and pulled out the slim black smartphone. The screen glowed in the darkness. Boris stared at it, his heart pounding in a way it had not pounded in 3 years. His hand trembled as he unlocked the phone. The message appeared. He broke my ribs. I can't breathe. Shadowtooth Dungeon. East Wing. Please. I don't have much time. Boris read it once. Twice. 3 times. His wolf roared inside him, a sound that shook the walls of the fortress. This was not a mistake. This was not a coincidence. This was the moon goddess speaking. He did not know who had sent this message. He did not know why it had come to this phone on this night. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever she was, wherever she was, he was coming for her. Boris grabbed his cloak, his weapons, and his rage. He walked out of the war room and into the main hall, where his enforcers were gathered. Mobilize the guard, he said, his voice cold and deadly. We leave in 5 minutes. Target, Shadowtooth territory. One of the enforcers stepped forward. My king, what is the reason for? Boris's eyes flashed gold. His wolf was at the surface now, barely restrained. Someone, he said quietly, just asked me for help. And I don't leave my people to die in dungeons. He turned and walked toward the armory. Behind him, the fortress erupted into motion. War was coming to the Shadowtooth Pack. And Boris Vokrain was bringing it personally. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. The healing ward smelled of sage and blood. Ylfa Silverin moved between the injured wolves with practiced efficiency, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floor. She had learned long ago to walk without making noise. Noise attracted attention. Attention attracted Lobo. The young warrior on the cot before her, his name was Dane, had taken a silver-laced blade to the shoulder during a border skirmish. The wound was infected, the edges blackened with the poison that made silver so deadly to their kind. Ylfa's hands glowed with the faint golden light of her healing gift as she worked, drawing the toxin out drop by drop. Thank you, Dane whispered, his voice rough with pain. I thought I was going to lose the arm. Ylfa kept her eyes down, focused on her work. You're welcome. Try not to move for the next few hours. The tissue needs time to knit properly. But Dane smiled at her. A genuine, grateful smile that reached his eyes. You saved my life. The least I can do is thank you properly. And that was when Ylfa made her mistake. She smiled back. It was barely a curve of her lips, a reflexive response to kindness in a world that had shown her so little of it. It lasted less than a second. But it was enough. She felt him before she saw him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The other patients went silent, their eyes starting to the doorway. Even Dane's smile faltered, his gaze shifting over Ylfa's shoulder with sudden fear. Ylfa's hands froze mid-gesture, the golden light flickering and dying. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. She knew that presence. That suffocating, predatory energy that made her wolf whimper and cower deep inside her chest. Lobo Umbre stepped into the healing ward like a storm rolling over the mountains. He was dressed in his patrol gear, dark leather armor reinforced with chainmail, the crest of the Shadowtooth Pack emblazoned across his chest. His dark hair was pulled back from his face, emphasizing the sharp angles of his jaw, the cold calculation in his eyes. He was handsome in the way a blade was handsome, cold, dangerous, designed to cut. His gaze swept the room once, then locked onto Ylfa. A word, he said quietly. Now. It was not a request. Ylfa's throat went dry. She forced herself to nod, to carefully set down the healing implements, to wipe her hands on the cloth at her waist. Every movement felt mechanical, disconnected from her body. She could feel the eyes of the other patients on her, sympathetic, pitying, but no one would intervene. No one ever did. She followed Lobo out of the healing ward and into the corridor beyond. The moment they were out of sight, his hand closed around her upper arm like a vice. What, he said, his voice still that terrible, quiet calm, did I tell you about smiling at other males? Ylfa's pulse thundered in her ears. Lobo, I was just. Answer the question. You told me not to. Her voice came out small, barely a whisper. And what did you just do? He thanked me and I. His grip tightened until pain shot through her arm. You smiled at him. You looked him in the eye. You let him think, even for a second, that you were available. That you were his. I wasn't. Do you think I'm stupid, Ilfa? He leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. Do you think I don't see the way they look at you? The way you encourage them with your soft words and your gentle hands? You're mine. You have been mine since the day I took you in after your parents died. And you will remember that. Lobo, please. But he was already dragging her down the corridor, away from the main halls, toward the stone staircase that led to the lower levels. Ilfa's stomach dropped. She knew where he was taking her. The dungeon. Lobo, please, I'm sorry, I didn't mean. He shoved her forward, and she stumbled, catching herself on the damp stone wall. Her healing dress, a simple gray shift that marked her station, caught on the rough edges, tearing at the hem. They descended into darkness. The torches grew fewer and farther between. The air turned cold and wet, smelling of mold and old pain. This was where the pack kept prisoners, rogues, traitors, wolves who had broken the laws. This was where wolves came to be forgotten. Lobo threw open one of the iron doors with a clang that echoed through the stone chambers. He shoved Ilfa inside, and she fell hard onto the floor, her palms scraping against the rough stone. Get up, he said. Ilfa pushed herself to her knees, her hands shaking. Lobo, please, I'm sorry. I won't. Get up. She forced herself to stand, swaying slightly, her bare feet cold against the dungeon floor. She could see the rage in his eyes now, that terrible, barely controlled fury that always preceded the worst of it. You think you can disrespect me? Lobo's voice rose, the calm veneer finally cracking. You think you can smile at other males, let them think they have a chance with what's mine? I wasn't. His fist drove into her side. The sound came first, that wet, grinding crunch of bone giving way under force. Then the pain, white-hot and all-consuming, radiating from her ribs through her entire chest. The air left her lungs in a violent rush, and she couldn't draw it back in. She collapsed to the floor, gasping, her vision swimming with black spots. She heard herself make a sound, something between a scream and a whimper, but it felt distant, disconnected from her body. Lobo stood over her, shaking his hand out as if he'd struck something hard. He looked down at her with that same cold disappointment, as if she were a project that had failed to meet expectations. 2 ribs, he said, his voice calm again. Maybe 3. You'll heal, eventually. Your bloodline is good for that, at least. Ilfa tried to breathe, but every attempt sent fresh agony tearing through her chest. She curled onto her side, her hands pressed against her ribs, trying to hold herself together. Lobo crouched down beside her, his hand coming to rest on her hair in a mockery of gentleness. You need to learn, Ilfa. I don't enjoy hurting you. But you force my hand. You make me do this. She couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't do anything but lie there and try not to die. When I come back, Lobo said, standing and brushing off his knees, you will apologize properly. And if you ever smile at another male again, if you ever look at another male the way you looked at that warrior, I will break your fingers. One by one. A healer without fingers is useless. Remember that. He walked to the door, paused, then looked back at her one last time. The dungeon guards will check on you in the morning. Maybe, if they remember. The iron door slammed shut. The bolt slid home with a heavy, final sound. Then the chain outside rattled into place, the secondary lock that meant no one could open this door from the inside, even if they had the strength to try. Ilfa heard his footsteps recede up the stone staircase. A distant door closed. Then silence. The kind of silence that pressed down on the chest and made breathing even harder. Ilfa lay on the cold dungeon floor, each breath a battle, each heartbeat a reminder that she was still alive, though she wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a curse. Somewhere in the darkness, water dripped from the ceiling, a slow, rhythmic plink that counted down the seconds of her life. She thought of her parents, of the rogue attack that had killed them when she was 16, of her younger sister, Mira, who had died 3 years later from an infected bite that Ilfa's healing couldn't cure, of her brother, Conry, who had tried to protect her from Lobo and had been exiled for his trouble. She thought of the life she had lost, piece by piece, until all that remained was this, a broken body on a dungeon floor, waiting to see if she would survive the night. And for the first time in 3 years, Ylfa Silverin allowed herself to think the forbidden thought. I can't do this anymore. I would rather die. The pain made time strange. Ylfa didn't know how long she lay there on the dungeon floor. It could have been minutes or hours. The cold seeped into her bones, making her shiver, and each shiver sent fresh agony through her broken ribs. She tasted copper in her mouth, blood from where she'd bitten her tongue when she fell. Somewhere above, she could hear the distant sounds of pack life continuing. Footsteps. Voices. The clang of the dinner bell echoing through the stone corridors. The world kept turning, indifferent to her suffering. She thought about dying. It would be easy. Simply lie here and let the cold take her. Let the internal bleeding, if there was internal bleeding, finish what Lobo had started. She could close her eyes and drift away, and maybe, finally, she would find peace. Maybe she would see her parents again. Her sister Mira, with her bright laugh and her wild spirit that the infection had slowly extinguished. Maybe death was not an ending but a reunion. But then she thought of Conry, her brother, the last family she had left in this world. Banished to the Northern Territories for daring to stand up to Lobo, for daring to tell the Alpha that his Beta was abusing the Pack's healer. The Alpha had laughed and told Conry to leave Pack lands by sunrise or face execution for spreading discord. Conry had found her that last night in the healing ward and had pressed something into her hands. A phone number, he had whispered. Mine. I know Lobo controls your phone, reads your messages, tracks your every move. But if you ever get access to another phone, any phone, you text me. You call me. And I will come for you. I don't care if I'm exiled. I don't care if the whole pack stands against me. You are my sister, and I will come for you. She had memorized that number. Repeated it every night like a prayer, like a lifeline connecting her to the world beyond these walls. And then, 6 months ago, the Omega named Sable, a kitchen worker with kind eyes and too many of her own scars, had slipped something into Ilfa's healing kit during a routine delivery of supplies. A phone. A cheap burner phone, the screen already cracked, the battery perpetually low. But it worked. It could send messages. And Ylfa had hidden it in the loose stone at the corner of her cell, this very cell where Lobo liked to lock her when she misbehaved. She had been saving it, waiting for the right moment. Afraid that if she used it too soon, Lobo would find out, would trace the call, would hurt Conry. But lying here now, feeling her breath grow shallower, feeling the cold creeping deeper into her bones, Ylfa realized something with sudden, crystalline clarity. There would be no right moment. There would only be now or never. With a groan that turned into a gasping sob, Ylfa forced herself to move. Every inch was agony. Her ribs screamed in protest. Her vision swam with black spots and flashes of light. But she dragged herself across the dungeon floor, her torn dress catching on the rough stone, her bare feet scraping against the cold surface. The loose stone was in the corner, half hidden in shadow. Her fingers found the edge, pried it up. The phone was there, wrapped in a torn piece of cloth to protect it from moisture. Ylfa pulled it out with shaking hands. The screen lit up when she pressed the power button, 8% battery. The light felt impossibly bright in the darkness of the cell, like a tiny sun that hurt to look at. She leaned back against the damp stone wall, cradling the phone against her chest, trying to breathe through the pain. Each breath was shallow, insufficient, like trying to drink air through a straw. Conry's number. She had to get it right. Her fingers hovered over the keypad, but her vision kept blurring. Tears mixed with the darkness, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She blinked hard, trying to focus, trying to remember the sequence of digits she had repeated so many times in her mind. She started typing. The area code first. 3 digits. Then the exchange. 3 more digits. Then the last 4. But her hands were shaking so badly. Her vision kept swimming in and out of focus. And halfway through typing the exchange, a fresh wave of pain tore through her chest, so intense that her thumb slipped on the screen. She didn't notice the mistake. Didn't see that she had pressed 7 instead of 4. She finished typing the number, then moved to the message field. What could she say? How could she possibly convey the desperation, the fear, the knowledge that this might be her last chance? Her fingers moved across the screen, typing slowly, carefully. He broke my ribs. I can't breathe. Shadowtooth Dungeon. East Wing. Please. I don't have much time. She stared at the message for a long moment. It felt inadequate. Too simple for the weight of what she was asking. But her vision was fading at the edges, and the phone battery was dropping to 7%, and she didn't have time for poetry. She pressed send. The message disappeared into the void, marked as delivered a moment later. Ilfa let the phone slip from her fingers, clattering to the stone floor beside her. The screen went dark, plunging the cell back into shadow. The only light now came from the torch in the corridor outside, its orange glow filtering weakly through the small barred window in the iron door. She had done it. She had reached out. Now all she could do was wait and hope that Conry would see the message before it was too late. Her eyes drifted closed. The cold was seeping deeper now, making her drowsy despite the pain. She knew that was dangerous, that falling asleep with broken ribs and possible internal injuries was a risk, but she was so tired. So desperately bone-deep tired. Please, she thought, sending the prayer out into the void. Please let him see it. Please let him come. Please don't let me die alone in the dark. She didn't know that her message had gone to the wrong number. She didn't know that 200 miles away, in a fortress carved from black stone and crowned with silver, an Alpha King was staring at a phone that had been silent for 3 years. She didn't know that the beast inside Boris Vokraine had just opened its eyes, and that it was hungry for blood. All she knew was the cold, and the pain, and the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, would come for her before Lobo returned to finish what he had started. The torch in the corridor guttered, its flame dancing wildly for a moment before settling back into a steady burn. In the darkness of the dungeon, Ilfa's breathing grew slower, shallower. And far above, in the world beyond the stone walls, the moon began to rise full and bright and watching. Somewhere in the northern territories, 200 miles away, Boris Vokraine stood alone in his war room, surrounded by the ghosts of his past and the weight of 3 years of grief. The maps on the table before him showed the territories under his rule. The Obsidian Throne's domain stretched across 500 miles of mountain and forest, encompassing a dozen smaller pacts that owed him fealty. He had built an empire. He had united warring factions. He had brought order to chaos through strength and ruthlessness and the kind of cold, calculating intelligence that made other alphas fear him. But none of it had brought her back. Kathwolf Primara. His mate. His queen. The woman who was supposed to stand beside him as he ruled, who was supposed to bear his heirs, who was supposed to be his partner in all things. She had been murdered on the night of their mating ceremony, poisoned with wolfsbane slipped into her wine during the feast. She had died in his arms, her eyes wide with shock and pain, her last words a whispered apology for leaving him. They never found who did it. The investigation had turned up dozens of suspects, rival pacts who wanted to weaken his rule, traitors within his own court, even foreign hunters who might have infiltrated the ceremony. But no concrete evidence. No justice. Just grief. And rage. And the hollow emptiness that came from losing the other half of your soul. Tonight marked 3 years since her death. Boris observed this anniversary the same way he had observed the previous 2, alone, in the dark, refusing to let anyone see the cracks in his armor. He had not taken another mate, had not even looked at another woman with interest. His advisors whispered that he needed an heir, that the throne required stability, that a king without a queen was vulnerable to challenge. But Boris didn't care about any of that. He cared about honor, about loyalty, about the bond that even death could not fully sever. And so he sat in his war room, staring at the locked safe in the corner, the safe that held Kathwolf's belongings. Her jewelry, her journals, the pressed flowers from their first hunt together, and her phone. He had locked it away after her death, unable to bear the sight of it, unable to delete the photos and messages that represented the life they should have had together. The phone had been silent for 3 years. Dead. Forgotten. Until tonight. The vibration was soft, barely audible. But in the absolute silence of the war room, it sounded like thunder. Boris's head snapped up. His wolf surged to the surface, golden eyes flashing in the darkness. Every sense went on high alert, scanning for threats, for intruders, for anything that could explain the impossible. The safe. The sound was coming from the safe. His heart began to pound, a sensation he had almost forgotten. For 3 years, he had felt nothing but cold determination and carefully controlled rage. But now, hearing that sound, something ancient and primal stirred in his chest. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. His hands moved to the keypad on the safe, a code only he knew. The numbers were Kathwolf's birthday backwards. He had never told anyone that detail. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside, nestled among the preserved flowers and the leather-bound journals, was the phone. Its screen was glowing. Boris stared at it, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. This was impossible. The number was dead. No one had this number anymore. It had been disconnected shortly after Kathwolf's death, preserved only because he couldn't bring himself to let go of even this small piece of her. His hand reached out, moving of its own accord, and picked up the phone. The screen was cracked. It had fallen during the chaos of that terrible night, but the display was clear enough. An unknown number. A message. His thumb hovered over the notification for a long moment. Part of him didn't want to open it. Didn't want to shatter whatever fragile illusion this might be. Didn't want to face the reality that this was probably just some cosmic mistake, a wrong number that happened to find its way to a dead woman's phone on the anniversary of her death. But he opened it anyway. The message appeared on the screen, simple and devastating in its desperation. He broke my ribs. I can't breathe. Shadowtooth Dungeon. East Wing. Please. I don't have much time. Boris read it once. Twice. 3 times. His wolf exploded to the surface with a roar that shook the stone walls of the fortress. This was not a coincidence. This was not a wrong number. This was the moon goddess herself reaching through the veil between worlds to deliver a message. Someone was dying. Someone had reached out in desperation and, by chance or fate or divine intervention, had found the one number in all the realm that would summon the Alpha King himself. And she was in the Shadowtooth territory. Boris knew that pack. A mid-sized territory on the eastern border of his domain, ruled by a weak alpha named Fergus who paid tribute but otherwise kept to himself. The beta there was named Lobo, a man with a reputation for cruelty that even Boris had heard whispers about. He broke my ribs. The words burned themselves into Boris's mind. Someone had done this to her. Some male had beaten a female badly enough to break ribs, badly enough to leave her gasping for breath in a dungeon. And she had texted this number, Kathwolf's number, for help. His hands were shaking. He realized with distant surprise that it was rage. Pure, undiluted rage of the kind he hadn't felt since the night he held Kathwolf's dying body in his arms. But beneath the rage was something else. Something he couldn't quite name. A pull. An instinct. A certainty that this was not random, that this moment had been written in the stars long before tonight. He had to go to her. Now. Boris turned and strode from the war room, the phone still clutched in his hand. He burst through the doors and into the main hall where his enforcers, the elite guard that protected the obsidian throne, were gathered for the evening briefing. They looked up in surprise. Boris never interrupted these meetings. Boris never showed emotion. Boris was always controlled, always calculated, always 3 steps ahead. But tonight, his eyes were burning gold, and his wolf was so close to the surface that his voice came out as half-growl when he spoke. Mobilize the guard. Full tactical gear. We leave in 5 minutes. The head enforcer, a scarred veteran named Dax, stood immediately. My king, what is the target? Shadowtooth territory. The dungeon. East Wing. What is the reason for the incursion? Boris's lips pulled back from his teeth in something that was not quite a smile. Someone asked me for help. He held up the phone, showing them the message. The enforcers exchanged glances, confused, uncertain. They knew about Kathwolf. They knew about the phone. They knew this should be impossible. But they also knew better than to question their king when his wolf was this close to the surface. 5 minutes, Boris repeated. Anyone not in the convoy gets left behind. He turned and walked toward the armory, the phone still in his hand, the message still burning in his mind. I'm coming, he thought, sending the promise out into the void. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I'm coming. And anyone who stands between us is going to die. Behind him, the fortress erupted into organized chaos as the enforcers scrambled to prepare for war. The moon hung full and bright over the mountains, watching as the Alpha King armed himself for battle. And 200 miles away, in a dungeon cell carved from cold stone, Ylfa Silveran's eyes drifted closed as her breathing grew shallower. The race had begun. The convoy of black SUVs tore through the night like a pack of wolves on the hunt. Boris sat in the lead vehicle, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the armrest hard enough to dent the metal. Beside him, Dax was coordinating with the other vehicles through a headset, his voice calm and professional despite the tension radiating from his king. ETA 20 minutes to Shadowtooth border, Dax reported. Ground team is ready. Aerial scouts report no unusual activity at the main compound. Boris didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, but his mind was 200 miles away, in a dungeon cell where someone was dying. He broke my ribs. I can't breathe. The words repeated in his mind like a mantra, like a prayer, like a curse. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity. Every second could be the difference between life and death. His wolf was clawing at his insides, demanding to be released, demanding to run faster, to reach her sooner. But Boris forced himself to remain in control. Barely. What's the protocol when we arrive? Dax asked carefully. He had served Boris for 15 years. He knew when his king was on the edge of losing control. We go in fast and hard, Boris said, his voice cold and flat. The dungeon is in the east wing of their main compound. We breach the perimeter, extract the target, and leave. Anyone who tries to stop us dies. And if Alpha Fergus objects to us invading his territory, Boris's eyes flashed gold. Then he dies too. Dax nodded slowly. He had expected as much. The beta, Lobo Umbre. Intel suggests he's the one who runs the day-to-day operations. Fergus is more of a figurehead at this point. Then Lobo is the primary target, Boris said. If he's the one who put her in that dungeon, if he's the one who broke her ribs, his hands clenched harder, and the armrest groaned under the pressure. Then he's mine. The SUV crested a hill, and the Shadowtooth territory came into view below. It was smaller than the obsidian throne, a compound of stone buildings surrounded by a wooden palisade fence, lit by torches that cast flickering shadows across the ground. Wolves moved between the buildings, going about their evening routines, completely unaware of what was about to descend upon them. Boris pulled out his phone, not Kathwolf's phone, which he had carefully placed in his jacket pocket, but his own, and checked the GPS coordinates he had triangulated from the message. The signal had come from somewhere in the eastern section of the compound, exactly where intelligence said the dungeon was located. 2 minutes, the driver announced. Boris reached for the weapon's harness at his feet and began strapping it on. Silver-edged blades. Tactical gear reinforced with steel. A cloak made from the pelt of a bear he had killed with his bare hands during his alpha trials. He looked like something out of an ancient legend, half modern warrior, half primal beast. Dax was watching him with something like concern. My king, if I may ask, who is she? The woman in the dungeon. Boris paused in his preparations. It was a fair question. He was about to start a war over someone he had never met, someone whose name he didn't even know. I don't know, he said quietly. But she texted my mate's phone on the anniversary of her death. That's not coincidence. That's the moon goddess speaking. Dax was silent for a moment. Then he nodded and began checking his own weapons. Then we bring her home. The convoy slowed as it approached the Shadow Tooth gates. The guards on duty looked up in confusion, then alarm, as they recognized the vehicles, the black SUVs with the silver wolf crest of the obsidian throne emblazoned on the doors. One of the guards stepped forward, holding up a hand. Halt! This is Shadow Tooth territory. State your business. Boris didn't wait for the vehicle to stop. He opened the door and stepped out while it was still moving, landing on the ground with predatory grace. His eyes were fully gold now, his wolf so close to the surface that his presence hit the guards like a physical force. They both took an involuntary step back, their own wolves whimpering in submission before the apex predator that stood before them. Open the gates, Boris said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The younger guard actually reached for the latch before the older one grabbed his arm. We can't just, you need permission from Alpha Fergus. Boris tilted his head slightly. I'm going to count to 3. If those gates aren't open by 3, I'm going to rip them off their hinges. And then I'm going to rip out your throats. 1. The guards looked at each other, frozen with indecision. 2. Behind Boris, the other enforcers were emerging from the vehicles, armed and ready. There were 20 of them, the elite of the elite, chosen for their loyalty and their ruthlessness. Against them, the Shadow Tooth Pack didn't stand a chance. The younger guard broke. He lunged for the gate controls, yanking the lever that released the locks. The wooden gates swung open with a groan of old hinges. Smart, Boris said. He walked through the gates without looking back, his cloak billowing behind him like the wings of some dark angel. The compound erupted into chaos. Wolves poured out of the buildings, alerted by the commotion at the gates. Some were in human form, some had already shifted, their eyes glowing in the torchlight. Shouts filled the air, confused, angry, frightened. The Alpha King. The Obsidian Throne is here. What's happening? An older wolf, one of the pack's council members, judging by the silver threading his hair, stepped forward with his hands raised in a placating gesture. Your Majesty, this is highly irregular. If you had sent word ahead. Boris walked past him without slowing. Where is your dungeon? The councilman blinked. Excuse me? Your dungeon. East Wing. Where is it? I don't understand. Boris stopped and turned, fixing the councilman with a stare that made the older wolf's knees actually buckle. I am looking for someone. She is in your dungeon, East Wing, and she is dying. You can either tell me where that is, or I can tear every building apart until I find her. Your choice. You have 5 seconds. The councilman's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Then he pointed with a shaking hand toward a low stone building on the eastern edge of the compound. There. The old garrison. The holding cells are in the basement. Boris was already moving. He crossed the compound in long, ground-eating strides, his enforcers fanning out behind him in a protective formation. Wolves scattered out of his path, pressing themselves against buildings, their eyes wide with fear. No one tried to stop him. No one was that stupid. The garrison was a squat building of gray stone, its windows narrow and barred. A single guard stood at the entrance, a young male who took one look at Boris and immediately stepped aside, his hands raised in surrender. Boris didn't even acknowledge him. He grabbed the door and yanked it open, the hinges screaming in protest. Inside was a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The smell hit him immediately: damp stone, old blood, fear, and beneath it all, something else. Something that made his wolf surge forward with sudden, desperate hunger. Her. He didn't know how he knew. Didn't know how he could identify the scent of someone he had never met. But it called to him like a beacon, like a light in the darkness, like the answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. His mate. His second chance. The moon goddess had not sent him a random plea for help. She had sent him her. Boris descended the stairs 3 at a time, his enhanced vision cutting through the darkness. The corridor at the bottom was lined with iron doors, each one locked and barred. Torches flickered in sconces on the walls, casting dancing shadows across the damp stone. He followed the scent, his wolf howling inside him, until he reached the last door on the left. The smell of blood was stronger here. And beneath it, that scent, honeysuckle and rain, and something uniquely her, that made every instinct in his body scream mine. Boris grabbed the iron door with both hands. It was locked from the outside with a heavy bolt and a chain. Security meant to keep someone in. To trap them. To cage them. His vision went red. With a roar that shook dust from the ceiling, Boris tore the door off its hinges. The metal screamed and bent, the bolts ripping out of the stone. He threw the door aside and it crashed against the opposite wall hard enough to dent the stone. Then he stepped into the cell. The torchlight from the corridor spilled in, illuminating the small space. Cold stone walls, damp and covered in moss. A drain in the center of the floor. No furniture, no bedding, nothing but stone and darkness and suffering. And there, slumped against the far wall, was her. Boris's breath caught in his throat. She was small, smaller than he had expected. Blonde hair tangled and matted, falling around her face in dirty waves. Her dress was torn and stained with blood, the gray fabric barely covering her. Her feet were bare, scratched and dirty from the rough stone. Her arms were wrapped around her ribs, holding herself together, and even from across the cell he could see the bruising, purple and black, and spreading across her shoulder and side. Her eyes were closed. For one terrible moment, Boris thought he was too late. Then her chest moved, a shallow, labored breath that was barely enough to sustain life. She's alive. Boris crossed the cell in 2 strides and dropped to his knees beside her. Up close, he could see the full extent of the damage. The bruising was extensive: ribs, shoulder, arm. There was dried blood at the corner of her mouth. Her skin was pale and cold to the touch, her lips tinged with blue. "Hey," he said softly, reaching out to touch her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes flickered open, pale gray, like storm clouds, unfocused and glazed with pain. They drifted across his face without recognition, without comprehension. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words slurred and barely audible. "Tried to. Connery, tell him." "I'm not Connery," Boris said. His hands moved over her with the efficiency of someone trained in battlefield medicine, checking for the extent of injuries. Broken ribs, definitely. Possible internal bleeding. Hypothermia setting in from the cold stone. But I got your message. I'm here. You're safe now. Her eyes drifted closed again. Tired. No. Boris cupped her face, his hand dwarfing her cheek. Stay with me. Eyes open. What's your name? Ilfa, she breathed. Ilfa Silver. She didn't finish the word. Her head lolled to the side, unconscious. Boris caught her before she could collapse completely, gathering her into his arms with a gentleness that contradicted his earlier violence. She weighed almost nothing, too light, underfed, fragile in a way that made his protective instincts roar to life. And as he held her, as her scent wrapped around him and her breath ghosted across his throat, Boris felt it. The bond. It snapped into place like a key turning in a lock, like 2 pieces of a puzzle finally meeting, like the universe itself had shifted to bring them together. It was different from what he had felt with Kathwolf, that had been fire and passion, burning bright and fast. This was deeper, slower, like roots growing through stone, like water wearing away rock over centuries. She was his mate. The moon goddess had not just sent him to save her. The moon goddess had sent him to her. "I've got you," Boris murmured against her hair. "I've got you, and I'm never letting go." He stood, cradling her against his chest, and turned toward the door. Dax was there, his expression carefully neutral as he took in the sight of his king holding an unconscious, battered woman like she was made of glass. "Get the medic," Boris ordered. "And prepare to move. We're leaving. Now." Dax nodded and spoke rapidly into his headset. Behind him, the other enforcers had secured the garrison, holding back the confused and frightened shadow-toothed wolves who had gathered outside. Boris carried Ilfa up the stairs and out into the compound. The moment he emerged, silence fell. Every wolf present could feel it, the bond, the connection, the way the Alpha King held the broken woman as if she were the most precious thing in the world. And then, from the back of the crowd, a voice rang out cold and furious and deadly. "What the hell do you think you're doing with my mate?" Boris looked up. A male wolf stood at the edge of the crowd, dressed in dark leather armor with chain mail across the shoulders. His hair was slicked back, his face twisted in rage, his eyes glowing with barely contained fury. Lobo Umbre, the male who had broken Ilfa's ribs. The male who had thrown her into a dungeon to die. The male who had dared to lay hands on his mate. Boris's eyes went full gold. His wolf surged to the surface with a roar that made every wolf in the compound drop to their knees in submission, every wolf except Lobo, who stood his ground through sheer stubborn rage. "Your mate." Boris's voice was quiet. "Deadly. You put your mate in a dungeon with broken ribs and left her to die in the cold? That's pack business," Lobo snarled. "She's mine. She belongs to Shadowtooth. You have no right. I have every right." Boris took a step forward, still cradling Ilfa against his chest. "Because she's not yours. She never was. She is mine. My mate. Given to me by the moon goddess herself. And if you ever touch her again, I will rip out your spine and feed it to the crows." Lobo's face went white, then red. "You're lying. She can't be." "Feel the bond," Boris said. "Every wolf here can feel it. She was never yours, Lobo. She was always meant for me. And you," his voice dropped to a growl that made the stones beneath their feet vibrate. "You laid hands on what belongs to me." For a moment, Lobo looked like he might actually be stupid enough to attack. His hands clenched into fists, his wolf rising in his eyes, his body tensing for a fight. Then Dax and the other enforcers moved forward, forming a wall of armed warriors between Lobo and their king. The message was clear. Try it, and you die. Lobo's eyes darted between them, calculating the odds. Then he took a step back, his hands raising in a mockery of surrender. "This isn't over," he said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "You can't just waltz into another pack's territory and steal." "I didn't steal anything," Boris said. "I rescued my mate from abuse. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the Council of Alphas. I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about how you've been treating your pack's healer." He turned away, dismissing Lobo as if he were nothing more than an annoying insect. "We're done here. Move out." The enforcers fell into formation around him, creating a protective barrier as Boris carried Ilfa toward the waiting vehicles. Behind them, the Shadowtooth pack watched in stunned silence. Lobo stood frozen, his face twisted in fury and humiliation, as the woman he had considered his property was carried away by the most powerful wolf in the realm. And in that moment, watching the taillights of the SUVs disappear into the night, Lobo Umbre made a decision. If he couldn't have Ilfa, no one would. The war had begun. Lobo stood in the center of the compound long after the convoy had disappeared, his hands clenched so tight that his nails drew blood from his palms. Around him, the pack had slowly dispersed, returning to their homes with whispered conversations and sidelong glances. They all felt it, The humiliation of their beta being dismissed like a child, the power of the Alpha King's presence, the undeniable truth of the bond that everyone had sensed. Ilfa had been the Alpha King's mate all along, and Lobo had never known. 3 years. 3 years he had kept her, controlled her, molded her into what he wanted. 3 years of breaking her spirit piece by piece, of ensuring that she would never dare look at another male, never dare dream of escape. He had taken her in after her parents died, or rather, after he had arranged for her parents to die. It had been so easy. A word in the right ear, a few silver coins to the right rogues, and the Silverin family had been ambushed on the northern border. Both parents killed. The daughter Mira bitten and infected. And Ilfa, beautiful, gifted Ilfa with her rare healing bloodline, left vulnerable and alone. Lobo had appeared like a savior, offering protection, offering shelter, offering love. And she had been so grateful, so desperate for someone to care about her, that she had never questioned how convenient his timing had been. He had planned to mate her officially once he had worn down her spirit enough that she would never dare refuse. Once he had isolated her completely from anyone who might protect her, her brother Conry banished, her friends driven away, her every movement controlled. But she had never quite broken the way he wanted. There was always something in her eyes, some tiny spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. It had infuriated him, driven him to greater cruelties, made him obsessed with finally, completely owning her. And now the Alpha King had taken her. His Ilfa. The thought made Lobo's wolf howl with rage. He could still smell her in the dungeon, honeysuckle and rain and fear. Could still see the way she had looked at him tonight, with those storm-gray eyes full of pain and desperation. Could still feel the satisfaction of hearing her ribs break under his fist. Beta Umbrae. Lobo turned to find Alpha Fergus approaching, flanked by 2 of the council elders. Fergus was an old wolf, well past his prime, more interested in comfort than leadership. It was why Lobo had been able to consolidate so much power. Fergus was content to let him run the pack as long as the Alpha could continue living in luxury. But now Fergus looked nervous. Frightened even. What, Fergus said slowly, was that? A misunderstanding, Lobo said through gritted teeth. A misunderstanding? Fergus's voice rose. The Alpha King just invaded our territory, destroyed our dungeon, and took one of our pack members. He claimed she was his mate. And you, he pointed an accusatory finger at Lobo. You had her locked in a cell with broken ribs. She was being disciplined for... I don't care. Fergus roared, showing more backbone than Lobo had seen from him in years. Do you understand what you've done? You've given Boris Vaucrane a legitimate grievance against us. He could bring the full weight of the Obsidian Throne down on this pack, and we would be powerless to stop him. He has no right. He has every right. She's his mate. The Moon Goddess bond supersedes pack loyalty. You know this. Fergus was pacing now, his hands shaking. The Council of Alphas will side with him. Every pack in the realm will side with him. We're finished. Unless, he stopped and fixed Lobo with a hard stare. Unless you can prove she wasn't his mate. Can you? Lobo said nothing. He had felt the bond too. Every wolf present had felt it, that undeniable pull, that connection that marked a true mating given by the Moon Goddess herself. That's what I thought. Fergus's shoulders slumped. Then we have no choice. We apologize. We offer tribute. We hope the Alpha King is merciful enough not to burn our territory to ash. No, Lobo said quietly. Fergus blinked. What? No. Lobo's hands unclenched. His mind was already working, calculating, planning. We don't apologize. We fight. Fight. Fergus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Fight the Alpha King? Have you lost your mind? He came here with 20 wolves. 20. His fortress is 200 miles away. He stretched thin, focused on his new mate. Lobo stepped closer, lowering his voice. We have allies. Wolves who would love to see the Obsidian Throne weakened. Wolves who would pay good money for information on how to hurt the Alpha King. Understanding dawned in Fergus's eyes, followed quickly by horror. You're talking about rogues. About traitors. I'm talking about survival. Lobo placed a hand on Fergus's shoulder, his grip just a little too tight. The Alpha King has made an enemy today. He stole from us. Humiliated us. If we just roll over and accept that, we'll be seen as weak. Other packs will challenge us. We'll lose territory. Lose status. Is that what you want? Fergus was silent, torn between fear and pride. Let me handle this, Lobo said, his voice smooth now, persuasive. I have contacts. Resources. I can make this right. But I need your blessing. I need your authority as Alpha. Fergus hesitated for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Do what you must. But Lobo, his eyes hardened. If this comes back on the pack, it's on your head. Not mine. Understood, Alpha. Fergus walked away, the council elders trailing behind him, leaving Lobo alone in the compound. The moment they were gone, Lobo pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he wanted. It was listed under a false name, but Lobo knew exactly who it belonged to. Gonzalo Naravark, the leader of the largest mercenary rogue pack in the Northern Territories. A wolf who cared nothing for tradition or honor, only for gold and blood. The phone rang twice before a rough voice answered. This better be good. It's late. Gonzalo, Lobo said, his voice cold and steady. I have a proposition for you. How would you like to kill an Alpha King? There was a pause. Then a low, dangerous chuckle. I'm listening. Boris Vaucrane took something from me. Something that belongs to me. I want it back, and I want him dead. Can you do that? The Alpha King? Another chuckle. That's going to be expensive. And dangerous. What's in it for me? Gold. Territory. And Lobo smiled, cold and vicious. I can give you information on the Obsidian Throne's defenses. Guard rotations. Weak points. Everything you need to plan an assault. Gonzalo was quiet for a moment, considering. You're talking about besieging his fortress. I'm talking about burning it to the ground. With him inside. And the girl? The one he took. Lobo's jaw clenched. She's mine. When this is over, I get her back. Alive. That's non-negotiable. Fine by me. I don't care about your love life. The sound of papers rustling came through the phone. I'll need 3 days to gather my wolves. And I want half the payment up front. You'll have it. Then we have a deal. Gonzalo's voice took on a vicious edge. The Alpha King is about to learn that even apex predators can be brought down. See you in 3 days, Lobo. The line went dead. Lobo stood there for a moment, phone in hand, staring at the empty gates where the SUVs had disappeared. His expression was calm now. Cold. Calculated. Ilfa had made her choice when she sent that text. She had chosen to betray him, to reach out to someone else, to try to escape. And Boris Vaucrane had made his choice when he decided to take what didn't belong to him. Now they would both pay the price. Lobo turned and walked back toward the main hall. There was much to do, gold to gather, weapons to prepare, information to compile. The war was coming, and he intended to win. Behind him, the dungeon door hung broken and twisted on its hinges, a monument to the violence that had shattered the fragile peace of the Shadowtooth Pack. And somewhere in the darkness, the moon goddess watched with ancient, knowing eyes and wondered if the mortals below would ever learn that some bonds could not be broken, not by violence, not by obsession, not even by death itself. The story had only just begun. Ilfa woke to warmth. It was such a foreign sensation that for a moment she thought she was dreaming. Warmth. Softness beneath her body. The smell of clean linen and wood smoke and something else, pine and leather and raw masculine power that made her wolf stir for the first time in months. Her eyes fluttered open, and she immediately winced against the light. Not the harsh orange flicker of dungeon torches, but soft golden sunlight streaming through tall windows draped with heavy curtains. She was in a bed, an actual bed with pillows and blankets and a mattress that didn't smell of mold and suffering. For a confused moment, she thought Lobo had moved her. That this was some new game, some new way to torment her by giving her comfort before ripping it away. But then the memories came flooding back. The dungeon, the phone, the text message sent with shaking hands. And him, the male with golden eyes who had torn the door off its hinges and carried her out like she weighed nothing. Boris Vokrain, the Alpha King. Ilfa tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain flared through her ribs, duller than before, but still present. She gasped and clutched her side, feeling the tight wrap of bandages beneath the soft cotton nightgown someone had dressed her in. Easy. The voice came from across the room, deep and commanding, but gentler than she expected. Your ribs are healing, but they're not fully knit yet. The pack healer said you need at least another day of bed rest. Ilfa's head snapped toward the sound, her heart suddenly racing. He was there, sitting in a chair by the window, backlit by the morning sun. Boris Vokrain, the Alpha King. Her. No, don't think it. Don't hope. But she could feel it. The bond. It hummed between them like a living thing, warm and insistent and terrifyingly real. She had heard stories about fated mates, about the moon goddess's gift, but she had never expected to experience it herself. Never thought she deserved it after everything Lobo had done to break her. Where am I? Her voice came out hoarse, barely a whisper. The obsidian throne. My fortress. Boris stood and crossed the room with that same predatory grace she remembered from the dungeon. He stopped a respectful distance from the bed, as if he sensed that getting too close would frighten her. You've been unconscious for almost 2 days. The healer said it was a combination of blood loss, broken ribs, and hypothermia. You're lucky to be alive. 2 days. She had lost 2 entire days. Ilfa's hands twisted in the blankets, her mind racing. Lobo is back in Shadowtooth territory where he can't touch you. Boris's voice went cold when he said the name. You're safe here. I promise you that. Safe. The word felt foreign. Dangerous. Like something that would be taken away the moment she believed in it. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Why did you come for me? You don't know me. I'm nobody. Boris's golden eyes softened. He moved closer, slowly, and lowered himself to sit on the edge of the bed. Even that small movement was calculated, careful, giving her time to tell him to stop if she wanted. You're not nobody, he said quietly. You're my mate. Given to me by the moon goddess herself. I would have torn apart 100 territories to reach you. The words should have been comforting. Romantic, even. But Ilfa had learned the hard way that possessive words from powerful males often came with a price. I didn't mean to text you, she whispered. I was trying to reach my brother. I made a mistake. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes. Boris's hand moved toward hers, then stopped, hovering just above her fingers. Asking permission. May I? Ilfa stared at his hand, large, scarred, capable of terrible violence, but held with such careful control. Slowly, trembling, she nodded. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and surprisingly gentle. The bond flared between them, sending sparks of sensation up her arm. Her wolf, dormant for so long, lifted its head with interest. I know what he did to you, Boris said, his voice tight with controlled rage. I can see the scars. The fear in your eyes. The way you flinch when I move too quickly. And I swear to you, Ilfa Silverin, that male will never touch you again. Not while I'm breathing. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. She didn't know if they were from relief or fear or the overwhelming exhaustion of finally being safe. He'll come for me, she whispered. He always does. He'll say I belong to him, that I'm his mate, and you were never his mate. Boris's grip tightened slightly. The bond doesn't lie. You were always meant for me. And when Lobo realizes that, when he understands that he can never have you, his eyes flashed gold. He's going to do something stupid. I'm counting on it. Ilfa's breath hitched. What do you mean? Boris was quiet for a moment, his jaw working as if he were deciding how much to tell her. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, worn leather, the kind used for official pack documents. While you were unconscious, I had my people do some digging into your past. Into what happened to your family. He placed the folder on the bed beside her. I need to show you something. It's going to hurt, but you deserve to know the truth. Ilfa stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. What truth? The truth about the rogue attack that killed your parents. Her heart stopped. The room tilted slightly and she gripped Boris's hand harder, using it as an anchor. What about it? Boris opened the folder and pulled out a series of documents, bank statements, correspondence, witness testimonies written in official pack script. He laid them out on the bed where she could see them. 12 years ago, your parents, Aldrich and Senna Silverin, were ambushed by rogues while traveling the northern border road. The attack was attributed to random violence. Bad luck. Wrong place, wrong time. Boris's finger traced one of the documents. But that's not what happened. Ilfa's hands were shaking. She could barely focus on the papers through the tears beginning to blur her vision. I don't understand. The rogues were hired. Paid with silver coins traced back to an account in the Shadow Tooth Pack. An account belonging to Lobo Umbre. The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. Ilfa shook her head, denial rising like bile in her throat. No, that's not. Why would he? Your bloodline. Boris pulled out another document, this one with an ornate family seal at the top. The Silverin crest. Your family comes from an ancient line of healers. Not just regular healers, ancient healers. The kind whose blood can cure wolfsbane poisoning, accelerate regeneration, even bring wolves back from the brink of death. That power was supposed to be your inheritance. Ilfa stared at the crest, at the flowing script that spelled out her family name, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Lobo knew, Boris continued, his voice gentler now. He knew about your bloodline. He knew that if he could control you, groom you, isolate you, break you, he could monopolize that power. Use it to gain influence, to sell your services to the highest bidder, to make himself indispensable to the pack. So he killed them. The words came out flat, emotionless. Because if Ilfa let herself feel the full weight of what she was hearing, she would shatter completely. He killed my parents to get to me. Yes. And Mira. Her voice broke on her sister's name. The rogue that bit her. Same pack. Same payment. Boris's jaw clenched. Your sister's death wasn't an accident either. It was a message. A way to break you completely, to make you dependent on Lobo, to ensure you would never dare leave him. Ilfa's vision swam. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The room spun around her, and distantly she heard herself making a sound, a low, keening wail that came from somewhere deep inside, from the place where all her grief and rage and betrayal had been locked away for years. Boris moved then, gathering her into his arms despite the injury to her ribs, holding her as she fell apart. She sobbed against his chest, her fists clutching his shirt, her body shaking with the force of emotions too big to contain. He took everything, she gasped between sobs. My family. My life. He made me think he said he was saving me. I know. Boris's hand stroked her hair, his touch infinitely careful. I know. And he's going to pay for it. I swear to you on the moon goddess herself, Ilfa. He's going to pay. They sat like that for a long time, Ilfa crying out years of pain while Boris held her, solid and unbreakable and safe. Eventually, the sobs quieted into hiccuping breaths. The tears slowed, and Ilfa found herself simply resting against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, feeling the warmth of his arms around her. What happens now? She finally whispered. Boris pulled back just enough to look at her, his thumb brushing away the tears on her cheeks. Now you heal. You rest. You let yourself remember what it's like to be safe. And then, his eyes hardened. Then we wait for Lobo to make his move. Because he will. Males like him don't let go of what they consider theirs. He'll come for you, and when he does, Boris's voice dropped to a growl. I'll be ready. Ilfa looked up at him, at this male who was essentially a stranger, but who felt more familiar than anyone she had ever known. The bond hummed between them, warm and steady, promising things she was afraid to hope for. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to be someone's mate. Lobo never, we were never, she couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't explain the years of abuse disguised as affection, the control disguised as care. I know, Boris said again. And there was such understanding in his eyes, such patience, that Ilfa felt something loosen in her chest. We have time, Ilfa. All the time you need. I won't rush you. I won't force anything. The bond is there, but what we build on top of it, that's our choice. What if I'm broken? The words came out small, frightened. What if Lobo damaged me so badly that I can't? You're not broken. Boris cupped her face in both hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. You survived 3 years of hell. You fought every day just to keep breathing. You sent a text message with broken ribs because you refused to give up. That's not broken, Ilfa. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen. The tears came again, but softer this time. Healing tears instead of grieving ones. Rest now, Boris said, gently guiding her back down onto the pillows. I'll have food sent up. You need to eat, to rebuild your strength. Will you stay? The question surprised her, but she found she meant it. His presence was calming in a way she couldn't explain, the opposite of Lobo's suffocating control. Boris smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his severe features into something almost boyish. As long as you want me to. He settled back into the chair by the window, close enough that she could see him, far enough that she didn't feel crowded. And as Ilfa's eyes drifted closed, lulled by the warmth and safety and the steady presence of the male the moon goddess had chosen for her, she let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe, finally, she could heal. Outside the window, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. A storm was coming, born of rage and obsession and wounded pride. But inside the obsidian throne, protected by stone walls and the fierce devotion of an alpha king, Ilfa Silverin slept peacefully for the first time in 3 years. The calm before the war. 3 days passed in a strange, gentle rhythm that Ilfa had never experienced before. She woke each morning to sunlight and the smell of breakfast being delivered by silent, efficient servants who never met her eyes, but treated her with a deference that made her uncomfortable. The pack healer, a stern older woman named Moira with silver threading through her dark hair, came twice daily to check her ribs, change her bandages, and make disapproving sounds about how long Ilfa had gone without proper medical care. These breaks are old, Moira had said on the second day, her fingers gentle despite her gruff tone as she examined the fading bruises. This one here, she pointed to Ilfa's left side. This didn't heal right. It was broken months ago and never set properly. Ilfa had said nothing. What was there to say? That Lobo had broken that rib during an argument about her speaking to a male patient, then refused to let her seek treatment because he said she needed to learn to be more careful? That she had healed it herself as best she could, working through the pain because there was no other choice? Moira had simply pressed her lips into a thin line and worked in silence, using a combination of traditional medicine and her own healing gifts to re-break and properly set the rib. It had hurt worse than the original injury, but Ilfa had bitten down on a leather strap and endured it without crying out. She was good at enduring. Boris came every day, usually in the early afternoon after he had finished with his council meetings and pack business. He never stayed long, an hour, maybe 2, but his presence filled the room in a way that should have been overwhelming, but somehow wasn't. They talked about small things. Safe things. He told her about the fortress, about the various packs under his rule, about the politics of maintaining peace across such a vast territory. She told him about her healing work, about the plants she used for medicines, about the satisfaction of saving a life that might otherwise have been lost. They didn't talk about Lobo. They didn't talk about the bond. They didn't talk about what came next. It was a careful dance, two wounded souls circling each other, testing the waters, trying to figure out how to be in the same space without causing more damage. On the fourth day, Ilfa was finally cleared to leave her room. Your ribs are stable, Mora announced, packing up her medical supplies. You'll be sore for another week, and you absolutely cannot shift until everything is fully healed. But you're strong enough to move around. Fresh air will do good. After Mora left, Ilfa stood in front of the mirror in her room for a long time, studying the stranger who looked back at her. She was wearing clothes that had been provided by Boris's staff, soft leather pants, a simple cream-colored tunic that didn't irritate her healing ribs, and boots that actually fit properly. Her hair had been washed and braided by a kind servant girl who had worked in silence, respecting Ilfa's need for quiet. She looked almost normal, almost like the girl she had been before Lobo, before the grief, before the slow, systematic destruction of everything she was. Almost. There was still something haunted in her eyes. Something broken in the set of her shoulders. Something that whispered she would never fully escape what had been done to her. A knock at the door made her jump, her heart racing before she could control it. Ilfa. Boris's voice, muffled through the wood. Mora said you're cleared to move around. I thought maybe you'd like to see the fortress. Ilfa took a breath, forced her pulse to slow, and opened the door. Boris stood in the hallway, dressed more casually than she had seen him before, dark pants, a simple shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and marked with old scars. He looked less like a king and more like a warrior, dangerous and powerful, but somehow approachable. His eyes swept over her, checking for signs of pain or distress with the practiced efficiency of someone used to assessing injuries. How are you feeling? Better, Ilfa said, and was surprised to find it was mostly true. Sore, but better. Good. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that softened his severe features. Come on. There's something I want to show you. He led her through the fortress, and Ilfa was amazed by the sheer scale of it. The obsidian throne wasn't just a building, it was a small city unto itself, carved from black stone and fortified with walls that could withstand a siege. They passed through corridors lined with tapestries depicting great battles, training yards where young wolves practiced combat forms, and a great hall with a ceiling so high it seemed to touch the sky. Wolves stopped and bowed as Boris passed, their eyes curious but respectful as they glanced at Ilfa. She could feel their assessment, their questions. Who was this strange female their king had brought back? Why did she carry a scent? Was she really his mate? The whispers followed them like shadows, but Boris seemed oblivious, or perhaps just unconcerned. Finally, he led her up a narrow staircase that spiraled to the top of the tallest tower. The door at the top opened onto a wide rooftop terrace, and Ilfa gasped. The view was breathtaking. Mountains stretched in every direction, their peaks crowned with snow that glittered in the afternoon sun. Forests spread like dark green carpets across the valleys. Rivers wound through the landscape like silver ribbons. And far in the distance, she could see other packed territories, clusters of buildings and smoke from cooking fires, marking the homes of wolves who owed allegiance to the obsidian throne. This is where I come when I need to think, Boris said, moving to stand at the stone railing. When the politics and the meetings and the weight of ruling gets to be too much, I come up here and remember why I'm doing this. Ilfa joined him at the railing, careful to keep a respectful distance. It's beautiful. It is. He was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon. I built this fortress after Cathwolf died. Before that, I ruled from my father's old stronghold, smaller, more traditional. But after I lost her, I needed something different. Something that felt like a fresh start. It was the first time he had mentioned his dead mate directly. Ilfa glanced at him, saw the tightness around his eyes, the grief that never fully left even 3 years later. You loved her very much, she said softly. I did. Boris's hands gripped the railing. She was everything I thought a mate should be: strong, fierce, unafraid to challenge me when I was being an idiot. We were going to change the world together. Make the territory safer, fairer, more unified. What happened to her? Poison. Wolfsbane in her wine during our mating ceremony. His voice went flat, emotionless in the way of someone reciting facts to avoid feeling them. She died in my arms while 300 guests watched. And I never found out who did it. I'm sorry, Ilfa whispered. Boris turned to look at her, and there was something raw in his expression. Something vulnerable that he probably didn't show to many people. I thought I would never feel the bond again. Thought the moon goddess had given me my one chance, and I had failed to protect it. For 3 years, I was empty. Going through the motions of ruling, but not really living. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. The bond flared between them, warm and steady. And then you texted a dead woman's phone on the anniversary of her death, he continued, a hint of wonder creeping into his voice. And I felt something I thought was gone forever. Hope. Ilfa's throat tightened. I don't know if I can be what you need. What you lost. I'm not strong like she was. I'm not fierce or unafraid. Lobo broke so much of me, and I don't know if I can. Stop. Boris's hand came up to cup her cheek, and this time she didn't flinch. You're not her. You were never meant to be her. The moon goddess didn't give me a replacement for what I lost. She gave me something new. Someone who understands grief and survival in a way Kathwolf never had to. Someone who knows what it's like to be broken and still keep fighting. But I didn't fight, Ilfa said, the words bitter. I just endured. I let him hurt me, control me, destroy me piece by piece. I didn't fight back. You're still here. Boris's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. That's fighting. Every day you woke up and chose to keep breathing instead of giving up, that's fighting. And that text message you sent with broken ribs and shaking hands, that was the bravest thing you could have done. Tears burned in Ilfa's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough over the past few days. I'm afraid, she admitted. Afraid that I'll never be normal again. That I'll always flinch at loud noises and cower when males raise their voices. That I'll never be able to give you what a mate should give you. Boris was quiet for a long moment. Then he took both her hands in his, cradling them gently. Can I show you something? At her nod, he released one of her hands and began rolling up his sleeve higher, exposing more of his forearm. Ilfa had noticed the scars before. Everyone who looked at Boris noticed the scars, but now he was deliberately showing them to her. This one, he said, pointing to a jagged line that ran from his wrist to his elbow, is from my alpha trials. My opponent had a silver blade. Cut me so deep I nearly lost the arm. I was 17. He turned his arm, showing her another scar, this one a perfect circle, puckered and pale. Silver bullet. Took it during a border dispute 5 years ago. Went straight through, but the poison nearly killed me anyway. I was in a coma for 3 days. He pulled off his shirt, a casual gesture that made Ilfa's breath catch, and turned to show her his back. It was a map of violence, covered in scars that told stories of battles fought and barely survived. Claw marks. Burn scars. The evidence of a life spent in combat. Every single one of these is a moment where someone tried to break me, Boris said, turning back to face her. His chest was just as scarred as his back, proof that he faced his enemies head-on rather than running. Everyone is a moment where I could have given up, could have let the pain win. But I didn't. I survived. I healed. And I became stronger for it. He took her hands again, placing them against his chest where she could feel the steady beat of his heart beneath the scarred skin. You think you're broken because Lobo hurt you. But look at me, Ilfa. Look at all these scars. Am I broken? No, she whispered. You're strong. You're powerful. You're scarred, he finished. Just like you. The difference is that I learned to wear my scars like armor. And you will too. With time. With healing. With someone who understands that strength isn't the absence of wounds, It's the refusal to let those wounds define you. Ilfa stared up at him, at this male who carried his own pain like a badge of honor, who looked at her brokenness and saw potential instead of weakness. And slowly, carefully, she let herself lean forward until her forehead rested against his chest. Boris's arms came around her immediately, holding her with that same careful gentleness that somehow made her feel safer than any amount of aggressive protection could have. "I won't touch you," he murmured against her hair. "Not like that. Not until you're ready. Not until you ask me to. The bond doesn't require it. We have time." "Thank you," Ilfa whispered, and meant it with every broken piece of her heart. They stood like that for a long time, two scarred souls finding comfort in each other's presence, while the sun moved across the sky and the wind whispered through the mountains. Neither of them noticed the dark shapes moving in the distant forest. Neither of them saw the mercenary rogues taking up positions around the fortress perimeter. Neither of them heard the message being sent from Lobo to Gonzalo, giving the final order to attack. The storm was here, and it was about to break over the obsidian throne with all the fury of a male who refused to let go of what he thought he owned. The warning came at dawn. Ilfa woke to the sound of bells, not the gentle morning chimes that usually marked the start of the day, but harsh, urgent clanging that sent wolves scrambling from their beds and into defensive positions. She sat up too quickly, gasping as her healing ribs protested, her heart already racing with a fear she couldn't name. The door to her room burst open, and Dax stood there in full tactical gear, his face grim. "We're under attack. The king wants you in the panic room. Now." "Attack?" Ilfa's mind struggled to process the word. "Who?" "Rogues. At least 100 of them, maybe more, surrounding the fortress perimeter. They have silver weapons and wolfsbane ammunition." Dax crossed the room in 2 strides and grabbed her arm, not roughly but with clear urgency. "We need to move." But Ilfa dug in her heels, even as her body screamed at her to run, to hide, to cower like she had done for 3 years under Lobo's control. "Wait. Silver and wolfsbane? That means injuries. Fatal injuries if the poison spreads. You need a healer. We have Mora. 1 healer for 100 wounded wolves?" Ilfa pulled her arm free, her mind already racing through what would be needed. "It's not enough. I can help." The king's orders were explicit. "You go to the panic room where you'll be safe. And I'm telling you that wolves are going to die if you don't have enough healers." Her voice rose, surprising both of them. This was new, this spine, this willingness to argue, to stand her ground. "I've spent 3 years being locked away while people suffered. I won't do it again." Dax stared at her for a long moment, clearly torn between following orders and acknowledging the truth of her words. Finally, he swore under his breath. "The king is going to kill me for this. Come on." He led her through corridors that had erupted into controlled chaos. Enforcers ran past in full armor, weapons gleaming. Young wolves were being herded toward the interior safe rooms by their parents. The elderly and the children, the most vulnerable, were disappearing into the heart of the fortress, where the walls were thickest. They emerged into the great hall, and Ilfa stopped dead. Boris stood at the center of a group of his senior warriors, dressed in battle gear that made him look like something out of ancient legend. Black armor reinforced with silver, a cloak of wolf fur across his shoulders, weapons strapped to every available surface. His eyes were pure gold, his wolf so close to the surface that the air around him seemed to shimmer with power. He was giving orders in rapid-fire succession, his voice carrying across the hall with absolute authority. "Eastern Wall is their primary target. Reinforce it with the 3rd Battalion. Archers on the ramparts, silver-tipped arrows. Anyone who gets through the first line gets met with." He stopped mid-sentence as he caught sight of Ilfa. His expression went from tactical focus to fury in the span of a heartbeat. He crossed the hall in ground-eating strides, his gaze locked on Dax. "I gave you explicit orders to take her to the panic room. She refused, my king. Said you'd need healers. I don't care what she said." Boris's voice was a roar that made every wolf in the hall flinch. She has broken ribs and a target on her back. If Lobo is out there, and you know damn well he is, then she is exactly what he's come for. I know. Ilfa stepped between them before this could escalate further, her hands raised in a placating gesture. I know I'm the reason they're here. But I'm also a healer, and I'm telling you that one healer isn't enough for what's coming. You know it isn't. Boris's jaw clenched so hard she could hear his teeth grind. You can barely walk without pain. You can't shift. You're vulnerable. So are the wolves who are about to take silver blades for me. Ilfa met his golden gaze, refusing to look away even though every instinct screamed at her to submit before this apex predator. Let me help. Please. I can set up a triage station here in the Great Hall, away from the fighting. I'll be safe, but I'll be useful. For a moment, Boris looked like he might physically pick her up and carry her to the panic room himself. His wolf was raging, demanding that he protect his mate, that he lock her away where nothing could touch her. But then something shifted in his expression. Recognition. Understanding. He saw what she was really asking for, not permission, but trust. Trust that she was strong enough to make her own choices. Trust that she understood the risks and was willing to take them anyway. Trust that she wasn't the broken, cowering thing Lobo had tried to make her. Fine, he said finally, the word clearly costing him. But you stay in this hall. You don't go near the walls. And he turned to Dax. You assign 2 enforcers to guard her at all times. If a single rogue gets within 50 feet of her, you put a blade through their heart. Understood? Yes, my king. Boris turned back to Ilfa, and for just a moment, the fierce warrior mask slipped. He reached out and cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone in a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. Don't make me regret this, he said softly. Don't make me lose you when I've only just found you. I won't, Ilfa promised. Be careful out there. Always am. He pressed his forehead to hers for just a moment, a brief connection that sent warmth flooding through the bond, and then he was gone, striding back toward his warriors, his voice already rising with new orders. The next hour was a blur of organized chaos. Ilfa commandeered the Great Hall with Moira's help, transforming it into an emergency medical station. Tables were cleared and converted into surgical surfaces. Supplies were brought up from the healing ward: bandages, poultices, tools for removing silver fragments, vials of antidotes for wolfsbane poisoning. You've done this before, Moira observed as they worked, her tone approving. Field medicine. Shadowtooth had border skirmishes regularly, Ilfa said, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she prepared surgical instruments. Lobo made sure I was always available to patch up his warriors. Said it was good practice. What she didn't say was that Lobo had also made sure she treated the warriors in full view of the pack, watching her every interaction, ready to punish her if she so much as smiled at a patient. Healing had been both her gift and her prison. But not here. Not now. The first casualties arrived as the sun fully rose. Young wolves with silver burns across their arms and legs, the wounds smoking and refusing to close. Ilfa fell into the familiar rhythm of triage, assessing injuries, prioritizing treatment, working with Moira to stabilize the most critical cases first. Silver blade to the shoulder, penetrated deep, one enforcer reported as he carried an unconscious warrior. He's lost a lot of blood. Ilfa's hands glowed with the golden light of her healing gift as she worked, drawing the silver poison out through the wound, coaxing the tissue to knit back together. It was exhausting work, healing always was, but it felt good. Purposeful. Like she was finally using her gift for something other than Lobo's control. The casualties kept coming. More silver burns. Arrow wounds. One wolf with a wolfsbane-laced blade still embedded in his thigh, the poison spreading through his bloodstream like black veins beneath his skin. Ilfa worked on him for 20 minutes, sweat beading on her forehead as she concentrated on purging the toxin. This was the gift Lobo had killed her parents for, the ancient healer bloodline that could neutralize wolfsbane, that could save lives that would otherwise be lost. The black veins slowly receded. The wolf's breathing stabilized. He opened his eyes and stared at her with something like awe. "Thank you," he whispered. "You're welcome. Rest now. You'll be weak for a few hours while your body finishes fighting off the poison." A massive explosion rocked the fortress, so powerful it shook dust from the rafters. Ilfa stumbled, catching herself on the table, her heart leaping into her throat. "What was that?" Mora demanded. One of the enforcers guarding the hall pressed a hand to his ear, listening to something through his communication device. His face went pale. "The eastern wall. They've breached it. Rogues are flooding into the outer courtyard." Another explosion. Closer this time. The sound of combat, snarls, screams, the clash of metal on metal echoed through the stone corridors. "The king?" Ilfa asked, trying to keep her voice steady even as terror clawed at her throat. "On the ramparts, holding the inner wall." But the enforcer's expression darkened. "They've identified Lobo Umbre leading the assault. He's pushing hard toward this section of the fortress." Toward her. Ilfa's hands trembled as she returned to her work, but she forced them steady through sheer will. She wouldn't cower, wouldn't hide. If Lobo wanted her, he would have to come through an army of wolves first. And if he did, she would face him. The doors to the great hall burst open again, and this time it was Dax himself, carrying a warrior who was bleeding from multiple wounds. "Mora, I need you on the walls. We have critical injuries piling up and not enough hands to treat them." "I can't leave." "I'll stay," Ilfa said. "I can handle the triage here." Mora looked torn, but another explosion made the decision for her. She grabbed her emergency kit and ran for the doors, leaving Ilfa alone with the wounded and her 2 enforcer guards. The wounded kept coming. The explosions kept getting closer. And through it all, Ilfa worked with steady hands and a racing heart, using the gift that Lobo had tried to steal to save the lives of wolves who had taken her in without question. She was bent over a young warrior with a silver burn across his chest when she felt it, a cold shiver down her spine, the sense of being watched by malevolent eyes. She looked up, and there, in the doorway of the great hall, stood Lobo Umbre. He was covered in blood, some his most not. His armor was dented and scorched. His eyes burned with rage and obsession and wounded pride. Behind him, 6 rogue mercenaries spread out, blocking the exits. The 2 enforcers guarding Ilfa immediately moved to intercept, weapons drawn. "Stay back," one of them shouted. "You're not authorized." Lobo moved faster than Ilfa had ever seen him move. His hand shot out, claws extended, and tore through the enforcer's throat in a spray of blood. The second enforcer lunged with a blade, but one of the rogues intercepted him, driving a silver dagger between his ribs. Both guards dropped, dead before they hit the ground. Ilfa stood frozen, the golden light of her healing flickering and dying around her hands. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. Lobo stood between her and the only exit. "Hello, Ilfa," Lobo said, his voice eerily calm despite the blood dripping from his claws. "Did you really think you could run from me? That the Alpha King could protect you?" "Stay away from me," Ilfa said, hating how her voice shook. She backed up until she hit the table behind her, her hand fumbling for something, anything, she could use as a weapon. "You're mine." Lobo stepped over the bodies of the dead enforcers as if they were nothing. "You've always been mine. I took you in. I protected you. I made you what you are. And you repay me by running to another male. You killed my parents." The words burst out of her, raw and furious. "You killed Mira. You destroyed my entire family just so you could control me. I did what was necessary." Lobo's eyes flashed. "Your bloodline is too valuable to waste. I gave you purpose, meaning, and this is how you thank me? By spreading your legs for the Alpha King." Rage surged through Ilfa, hot and bright and cleansing. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't afraid. She was furious. "He's my mate," she said, her voice steady now. "My true mate, chosen by the moon goddess. Not you. Never you." You were just a monster who thought he could own me. Lobo's face twisted with rage. If I can't have you, no one will. He lunged, and the great hall exploded into violence. Lobo moved like death itself, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. Ilfa threw herself sideways, her broken ribs screaming in protest, and grabbed the only thing within reach, a surgical blade from the table. It was small, pathetic compared to the claws and fangs of a fully shifted werewolf, but it was something. She swung wildly as Lobo's hand shot out to grab her. The blade connected with his forearm, drawing blood, and he jerked back with a snarl of surprise. You dare. The rest of his words were cut off as something massive crashed through the doorway behind him. Boris Vokrain, covered in blood and fury, slammed into Lobo with the force of an avalanche. They went down in a tangle of limbs and snapping jaws, rolling across the floor in a storm of violence that made Ilfa's earlier encounter look like a child's scuffle. Get her out. Boris roared to someone behind him, even as his fist connected with Lobo's jaw hard enough to crack bone. But the rogues were already moving, fanning out to surround them. One lunged for Ilfa, and she threw the surgical blade with desperate strength. It embedded itself in his shoulder, not fatal, but enough to make him stumble. More enforcers poured through the door, engaging the rogues in brutal close-quarters combat. The great hall became a battleground, tables overturning, wounded warriors scrambling for cover, the air thick with snarls and the clash of weapons. Boris and Lobo fought like ancient enemies, each blow meant to kill. Lobo shifted mid-fight, his bones cracking and reforming into his wolf shape, a massive gray beast with black markings across his muzzle. He lunged for Boris's throat, jaws snapping. But Boris was faster. He caught Lobo's wolf by the scruff and threw him across the hall with supernatural strength. Lobo crashed into a stone pillar hard enough to crack it, yelping in pain. She was never yours. Boris's voice was barely human now, his wolf so close to the surface that golden fur rippled across his skin. The moon goddess didn't choose you for her. You were just a parasite feeding on her suffering. Lobo struggled to his feet, blood dripping from his muzzle. But instead of attacking Boris again, his eyes fixed on Ilfa. And he ran. Not away. Toward her. Ilfa saw it happening in slow motion, the massive gray wolf barreling toward her, jaws open, murder in his eyes. She tried to move, but her body wouldn't respond fast enough. The injured ribs, the exhaustion, the sheer terror, it all locked her muscles in place. She was going to die. But then Boris was there, intercepting Lobo mid-leap. They collided in midair with a sound like thunder, and came down in a heap of snapping teeth and raking claws. Blood sprayed across the stone floor, so much blood that Ilfa couldn't tell whose it was. Boris's hand closed around Lobo's throat, squeezing. You will never touch her again. And with one brutal twist, he tore Lobo's throat out. The gray wolf's body went limp, blood pooling beneath him in a spreading crimson lake. His eyes, still holding that obsessive rage, stared at nothing as the light faded from them. It was over. Lobo Umbre was dead. But in the moment of Boris's distraction, in the single heartbeat where he was focused on ending the threat to his mate, one of the rogues saw an opportunity. Gonzalo Neravark stepped from the shadows near the doorway, a crossbow raised, a bolt loaded with a tip that gleamed sickly green in the torchlight. Wolfsbane. For the contract. Gonzalo shouted and fired. No, Ilfa screamed, but it was too late. The bolt struck Boris in the shoulder, punching through his armor and embedding deep in the muscle. He staggered, his hand going to the wound, and Ilfa saw the black veins already beginning to spread from the impact site. The poison was fast. Concentrated. Meant to kill. Boris dropped to one knee, his face going pale. Around him, the enforcers surged forward, cutting down Gonzalo and the remaining rogues with brutal efficiency. But the damage was done. Ilfa was running before her mind could catch up to her body, ignoring the pain in her ribs, ignoring everything except the male collapsing on the blood-soaked floor. She fell to her knees beside him, her hands already glowing with golden light. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice shaking. "Don't you dare die on me. Not after everything. Not after." "Ilfa." Boris's hand came up to cup her face, and she could see the effort it cost him. The black veins were spreading faster now, crawling up his neck toward his heart. "Get to safety. The fortress is secure, my king," Dax said, appearing beside them. His face was grim but relieved. "All hostiles are down, but you need medical attention. Now, Mora," Ilfa started, "is treating critical casualties on the ramparts. You're the only healer here." Dax's expression was dire. That bolt was pure wolfsbane concentrate. Without treatment in the next few minutes, the poison will reach his heart. Ilfa stared at the wound, at the black veins spreading like cracks through porcelain, and felt something click into place inside her. This was what her bloodline was for. This was why the moon goddess had given her this gift, why she had survived 3 years of hell, why she had sent that desperate text to a dead woman's phone. For this moment. For him. "Clear the table," she ordered, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Get me every antidote in the healing ward. And someone find me a silver blade. I need to cut the bolt out before I can start purging the poison." The enforcers moved with military precision, following her orders without question. They lifted Boris, who was rapidly losing consciousness, onto the cleared table. Dax returned with a silver dagger, its blade gleaming wickedly in the torchlight. "This is going to hurt," Ilfa said, looking down at Boris. His eyes were barely focused now, the gold fading to a dull amber as the poison worked through his system. "I need you to stay with me. Can you do that?" "Always," Boris whispered, his lips pulling into a ghost of a smile. "For you, always." Ilfa took a breath, let the golden light of her healing surge through her hands, and began to work. The bolt had embedded deep, the wolfsbane-coated tip lodged against bone. She had to cut around it, carefully, precisely, using the silver blade to slice through muscle tissue that tried to heal even as she worked. Boris's body convulsed with pain, but the enforcers held him steady. "Got it," she breathed, pulling the bolt free. It clattered to the floor, still smoking with residual poison. But the damage was extensive. The black veins had spread across his entire chest now, creeping toward his heart with every beat. If they reached it, he would die. No healing could save him once the poison claimed his heart. Ilfa placed both hands over the wound and closed her eyes, reaching deep into the well of power that was her birthright. The ancient healer bloodline. The gift that could neutralize wolfsbane, that could pull poison from blood, that could bring wolves back from the brink of death. The gift Lobo had killed for. The gift the moon goddess had preserved for exactly this moment. Golden light blazed from her hands, so bright that the enforcers had to look away. Ilfa could feel the poison fighting her, could feel it trying to spread, to corrupt, to kill. But she was stronger. She had survived 3 years of Lobo's torture. She had crawled across a dungeon floor with broken ribs to send a text message. She had stared down her abuser in a hall full of enemies. She was not going to lose her mate now. The black veins began to recede, inch by inch, pulled back by the golden light that flooded through Boris's system. Ilfa poured everything she had into the healing, every ounce of strength, every reserve of power, every desperate hope that this would be enough. The wound began to close. The black veins faded. The poison was purged, drop by drop, until Boris's chest was clear of corruption. And then Ilfa felt something shift inside her. A breaking. A transformation. A barrier that had held her trapped for so long finally shattering under the weight of her determination. Her wolf. The wolf that had been silent, dormant, broken by trauma and abuse, it rose inside her for the first time in years. She felt its presence like a surge of wild power, fierce and untamed and absolutely hers. "Mine," the wolf growled, staring at the mail on the table. "Our mate. Ours to protect. Ours to save." Ilfa opened her eyes, and they blazed with golden light that matched Boris's own. On the table, Boris gasped and his eyes flew open clear, focused, alive. The wound on his shoulder was closed, the skin pink and new. The poison was gone. He stared up at Ilfa, and slowly, a smile spread across his face. "Your eyes," he whispered. "They're golden. Your wolf." "She's awake," Ilfa said, and felt tears streaming down her face. "She's finally awake." Boris sat up, moving with the careful precision of someone testing their body after near death. His hand came up to cup Ilfa's face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "You saved me. You saved me first," she said, her voice breaking. "In that dungeon. You came for me when no one else would. You showed me I was worth saving. So yes, I saved you. Because you're mine, Boris Vokrain. My mate. My king. And I am done being broken." Something fierce and possessive flared in Boris's eyes. "Say it again. You're mine." He pulled her down to him, his lips claiming hers in a kiss that was part desperation, part celebration, part claiming. The bond between them exploded into life, no longer tentative, but blazing with the full force of a true mating. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Boris pressed his forehead to hers. "I need to hear you say it. I need to know you choose this. Choose me. Not because of the bond, not because I saved you, but because you want this." Ilfa looked at him, really looked at him. At the scars that marked his body. At the fierce protectiveness in his eyes. At the male who had torn through an army to reach her, who had given her time to heal, who had trusted her to make her own choices. "I choose you," she said clearly. "I choose this bond. I choose us. I choose to be your mate, your Luna, your partner. Not because I have to. Because I want to." Boris's eyes blazed gold. "Then claim me. Make it official. Let every wolf in this realm know that we belong to each other." Ilfa's wolf surged forward, eager and fierce. She leaned down and pressed her mouth to the junction of his neck and shoulder, the traditional claiming bite location. And for the first time in her life, she let her canines extend, let her wolf come forward, and bit down. Not hard enough to truly wound. Just enough to break the skin. To mark him as hers. Boris groaned, his hands fisting in her hair, his body arching beneath her. The bond snapped completely into place, no longer just a connection but a fusion, two souls becoming one. When Ilfa pulled back, her mark gleamed on his skin, a bite that would scar, that would tell every wolf who looked at him that he was claimed. "My turn," Boris growled and pulled her down beside him on the table. His mouth found her neck, and she felt the press of his canines against her skin, a question, a request for permission. "Yes," she breathed. "Mark me. Make me yours." His bite was gentle despite the fierce possessiveness behind it. Pain flared for just a moment, then transformed into something else: pleasure, completion, rightness. Ilfa gasped as the bond locked into place from both sides, cementing what the moon goddess had started. They belonged to each other now. Completely. Irrevocably. Forever. When Boris finally released her, they lay tangled together on the table, both marked, both claimed, both whole in a way neither had been before. Around them, the great hall was silent. The enforcers had discreetly withdrawn, giving their king and his new Luna privacy for this most sacred moment. Outside, the sounds of battle had ceased. The fortress was secured. The threat was ended. Lobo was dead. The war was won. And Ilfa Silverin, no longer broken, no longer afraid, no longer alone, lay in the arms of her mate and finally felt at peace. "What happens now?" she whispered against his chest. Boris's arms tightened around her. "Now we rebuild. Together. You as my Luna. Me as your mate. We heal the territories. We hunt down anyone who helped Lobo or Gonzalo. We make sure no one ever threatens our pack again. And us." He pulled back enough to look at her, and the love in his eyes took her breath away. "Us? We get to have the life that was stolen from us. We get to be happy. We get to prove that even broken things can be made whole again. Ilfa smiled a real smile, bright and genuine and free. I like the sound of that. Good. Boris kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Because you're stuck with me now, Luna. The moon goddess gave you to me, and I am never, ever letting you go. Promise? Promise. Outside, the sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A new day, a new beginning. And in the great hall of the Obsidian Throne, two scarred souls found healing in each other's arms, proving that even the darkest night must eventually give way to dawn. Subscribe to see more stories like this, and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story has reached across the world. Thank you for being part of Ilfa and Boris's journey from broken to whole, from victim to victor, from alone to beloved. May we all find the courage to send that desperate text when we need saving, and may we all have someone who tears down doors to reach us.